the expectations of the people who are excited about this. I'll share my screen in a bit. That's just for the talking a bit about the van itself. But before I get there, I'll just give a bit of a history about myself and giving and faith. I grew up in a conservative evangelical church, but like a pretty decent one, I would say. It wasn't very political as things are nowadays often. I was taught sort of the I think it's a fairly common line about God owning everything and us just being stewards. I mean, of course, it's fairly common, but yeah, I was also taught about the story of the young Samaritan at a young age. The story of the Good Samaritan. Oh my gosh, sorry, my brain is all scrambled. At a young age, and I would occasionally go to New York City with my family and be confused about why we were not applying the parable of the Good Samaritan, because we'd walk by homeless people all the time and not do anything. And of course, later I learned that homelessness is a very difficult and complicated problem, and it's not very effectively helped by one person stopping for somebody. But at the same time, I also realized that the problem was a bit more general. It's not just like, why aren't we stopping to help people, homeless folks, as we walk by them, but also why aren't we doing more in consideration for the global poor in general, because the opportunity always exists, very similar to how you can walk by homeless folks. When I was younger, I kind of hoped that there was a reason. I just didn't know, like that just made things make sense. And then when I went to college, I thought it was about time to try and figure out what that reason was, to find it. And I asked around a good amount, did some research, did some thinking, studied scripture, and in the end, just didn't see a reason that things should be the way they are, the norms that they are, where speaking for America at least, the Christian life financially is very, very similar to the lives of non-Christians. So I just, at that point, decided that everything went up. I should just, oh no, what happened? Can you still hear me? I think I'm still on. I think my computer might have just tried to go to sec. Okay.
Your camera is hanging, it sounds like.
Sorry,
I still hear you.
Okay.
It feels like your camera is hanging.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on there. Maybe. Yeah. Well, as long as you can still hear me.
I'm hearing you. Okay.
Okay. I'll just keep going. Hopefully the camera side will fix itself. It's just strange. Hasn't happened to me before. Right. At that point, I decided that it just made sense to give what I could, to keep only what I need. And I just started trying. As a college student, of course, didn't have very much money, had essentially no income. So it was more like a practice run, but I took it very seriously. I tried to think through these decisions very carefully and wrestled with them a lot for about a year. It was similar to how people try to become vegetarians. And when I say try, I really do mean try. Like they're putting a lot of effort into their vegetarian choices, but it doesn't necessarily come naturally. Sometimes these people, when they're trying to be vegetarians, they'll wrestle with it and then not be able to make it work. My brother was like this. But sometimes people become vegetarians, and maybe they struggle for a little while, or maybe not even very much, and then they just kind of forget about the effort involved in being a vegetarian. Like they just, it no longer crosses their mind that they're making that decision. And that's sort of how it became for me when it comes to giving. About a year after I decided to give what I could, keep only what I need, I had this epiphany. I was just sitting at a study lounge in college thinking about what it meant to own things, thinking about a fact that I later learned was false, but is still effective as a thought experiment. I thought the Native Americans didn't have a concept of land ownership when the Europeans came to America, and that they must have been really weirded out when the Europeans were like, "This is my land now." Sort of like someone pointing to the moon and saying, "Hey, that's my moon. Don't look at it. You have to pay me if you do." It's just vast and uncontrollable and just a weird thing to try to claim. And then I realized that the same sort of lens of the weirdness of it could apply to any kinds of physical possessions, because it's unless they're very small and close to your body, they're not really the kinds of things that can be controlled, um, not very easily, not very well. Yeah, somehow though that lens just became something that I could. It's like I saw the code of the matrix or something like that. I could see what was going on when it comes to ownership and possession, and I could see what life was like without that, and just no longer became a temptation to try to keep as much as I could. It's like I stopped fighting with myself. It just became the natural center of gravity, for the money I had for it to be given when I could. It's just what made more sense after that point. This was still in college, but when I entered into adult life, the workforce, basically went as I hoped, planned. When I talked to a lot of people, a lot of ministers especially, I kind of thought it was a phase, and I proved them wrong pretty well. I just kept on chugging along, giving what I could. And this takes me to California in the van. About a year after I started working, I moved to California. I had heard about folks at Google living out of their cars, and I was like, wow, that sounds very efficient. I don't know if I can do it, but I'll try it out and see what happens. So I did, and it was something that could work for me. This was the way I wanted, or this is how I realized that there's a relatively easy solution to the problem of like struggling to figure out what I need, because that's not like necessarily an easy line to draw. But if I try to live without something and I can't do it, then I need it.
Oh, you're muted, but we can see your screen.
Yeah, I'm not hearing Oliver, but I see a picture of a car. JD, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Hey, sorry, I'm not used to sharing screens on Zoom. I'm used to Google stuff. 1 second.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, okay, I've got to uncheck the share tab audio. All right, how do I sound?
Sound good.
Great. So this is the minivan. I lived out of it for about 4 years, altogether. And like I said, I moved into it just because I thought it was worth a try. And if it's something that could work for me, then why not? And it could work for me. It's not very glamorous. There are people who like are drawn to the van lifestyle because they see Instagram pictures and things like that. My lifestyle is not exactly very inspiring, in that sense anyway. But I didn't want to, even if like I definitely could have made it nicer. It's just not something that ever mattered to me, especially because in a sense I was living in the van. In a sense I was just living out of the Google offices and sleeping in the van. And it was a fine environment to be. I just needed somewhere to rest my head and have the sunlight blocked out for me. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that for the photos. There's more of like this presentation I've given before is more about like little fun factoids about the van life, but
Is that you under the covers, the polka dot covers?
no, that was my body pillow under the polka dot covers. My head would go right where you could pretend that's my body, and it's essentially how the setup would work anyway.
Hey, Oliver, if you could share real quick some like tips and tricks that you discovered while living in the van, like with ventilation, circulation, and so forth. Maybe take a minute
Sure.
or two to tell.
Absolutely. Well, one thing I realized is that I do need ventilation. At first, I tried just having the windows closed, like hoping that there'd be enough air for the night. My mom was like, "No, you definitely need the ventilation," and I was like, "Well, do I?" And then I looked it up, and OSHA standards say that apparently you do need pretty significant airflow throughout the night. So I got these little overhangs for the outside of the windows, so I could crack them open, and the rain wouldn't come in. because although I was in the Bay Area, it doesn't rain very much in the Bay Area. It does rain sometimes, so it is necessary. Let's see, other fun facts. The surface of the street and the surface of the van are both uneven, so I had to like put things under the mattress to even that more. At first, I just thought I could live with it, but it's surprisingly hard to sleep when your mattress is on a little bit of an incline. It always feels like you're falling over. So at first, I just stuck things under the mattress and tried to even it out that way, but then it became lumpy under there. So in the end, I went to Home Depot to get a slab of wood, and I ended up buying just a door and sticking it under the mattress so that I had a hard surface to adjust with other things beneath it. Let's see, what else is there? When you breathe at night, you exhale a lot of moisture. So what I ended up doing was collecting the silica gel packets from like snacks and boxes and just putting them with my clothes so that they would stop getting quite as moist. They weren't like terrible, but just a little annoying to pick up and feel that. And yeah, like I was saying, not very glamorous, but it got the job done. Let me pull up my notes again. My phone went to sleep. Yeah, so that's like the history of my thinking about giving, and I guess just talk a bit about where I ended up in terms of deciding what I need and what that looks like for me. I think John mentioned in the description or just my introduction that I give something like 90%. I think at this point it's around 85% because I'm living in New York City now, not out of the van. But the way I think about that is just what I was saying before. I just try to keep what I need and give away the rest. It's not really about a particular percentage. The fact that I can give such a large percent is entirely because I work in tech and am pretty good at my job, so I'm able to have a pretty high income. If I were to earn a lot less, I wouldn't necessarily keep any less. I would still just like try to live at a simple standard and to give beyond that. Yeah, and that means that in the future, like if I have a family and kids and everything, then I'm going to be giving a smaller percentage, and that's totally fine with me. I can just give what I can as the circumstances allow. All right, I'm going to talk more about that line about giving what I don't need and keeping what I do need, and how I think about that, because it's not a very easy choice to make, and definitely just drawing a line in the sand somewhere. I mentioned before, one key aspect of the way I approach it is just that if I suspect I can live without it, then I try living without it. That's pretty much the guiding principle that's led me to where I am and how I decide what's necessary. I will say that earlier on I was quite stringent because of that, because I was like, all right, I think I can live without most things, so I'll just try it. I was definitely right about some of that, including the van even, but in particular, a few things forced me to confront some of the questions that I brought up. One thing was dating people. At first, I was hoping that I could just find there's someone out there who has a similar minimalistic line, and I'm sure it's still true, but it's just not something to be counted on. And in the end, I think it is worth it for me to try to date and marry someone who's not precisely aligned, but just also up for living a relatively simple life. That's one thing. And that involves compromise. I'm not going to be dating someone who is exactly as minimalistic as me. Besides, even if there's someone who's in the ballpark, it's never going to be precise. And I think there is space for compromise and for just being at different places about those things. It's not really helpful to try and micromanage the budget, make things literally as minimal as possible. Because I was hoping at first that the sort of the highlights and the home state of dating could be accomplished, could be created in a much lower budget way. But it's just not really, there's like a cultural language around spending, around events. And there's some compromise that's available with that cultural language, but asking someone to speak an entirely different language, maybe like an invented language, is just a bit too tall an ask. So yeah, that's dating. I've become now I still have a range of like how much difference I can work with, but I think like as long as as long as the person I'm dating is happy with like a lower middle class lifestyle, I think that's fine. I don't personally need to go out to eat, or I don't need to spend money on events. It's not really something that I can work without that. I can see, however, that a lot of people can't, and that's just okay. Moving to New York is another thing that forced me to confront the question about like what I really need and how to budget for that. Living in the minivan was kind of a way to dodge the question in a sense, because I had so much of my needs met by Google and by just the lowest possible threshold at the minivan. But when I moved to New York, there is the full range of housing prices available still, but it's not quite as convenient at the lower end of the scale. The lower end of the scale would be like spending hours to commute and living in a really miserable situation. And while that it's like technically possible to do, it's just not helpful for the rest of the things that I need to do in life, or even like just increasing my income. If my goal is really to give away as much as possible, then I would be able to do that more effectively by trying to aim for promotion and working hard in that way, rather than spending hours a day commuting and scraping the pennies with the budget. In terms of how I make my decisions now, I don't actually use a budget, and that's because in my early days of thinking about what I needed, I was able to decide about most things and not needing them. So at this point, it's just a matter of thinking about what things I am choosing to spend money on and how I feel about that. And I'm okay making those decisions moment by moment, or like looking back on them after a few weeks, rather than trying to budget them out strictly ahead of time, or just even loosely ahead of time.
We have
yes.
another minute or two. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'll finish out on this last thought about how this interacts with friends and family. I think it's really just dependent on people's life circumstances and what paths they see for them. For me, it was possible for me to just choose not to spend money going out, because like, except for dating, I would say, but with friends, I just had a bunch of friends who are already satisfied along with me to just be sitting around talking often, or to play old games, or to read books from the library. There's just a lot of things that you can do with other people for free, and it does like have a selective effect on my friends, but it's not an effect that I mind. Whereas with family, it doesn't really work that way. I'm still trying to navigate this, but I think there's like a spectrum in terms of how stringent to be, and how much to isolate yourself, for lack of a better phrase. I don't think either end of the spectrum is very helpful. Either like trying to, be very, very isolated and decide not to do things with your family, or to just like go along the flow entirely and not to question what is normal in the culture. I think the right answer is somewhere in the middle. Exactly where it is, just so circumstantial. Yeah, that's probably a good place to stop.
So,
Happy to take any
thanks so
questions.
much, Oliver. Well, why don't we give like a e-clap for Oliver, like digital clap wherever you are in the world. Really, really incredible story. And thanks so much for being like just open and vulnerable with like this really unique experience that I imagine many people who've gone through similar experiences maybe don't want to like speak so openly about it and share it with other Christians like around the world. So it's so cool that you're here and that you're sharing with us. So thank you for that.
Yeah, my pleasure.
A reminder to everybody, we have a link where you can submit questions for Oliver. I'm going to choose from these questions. I'm going to choose the most relevant questions and any really highly upvoted questions. So please like vote for those. I also have some questions that I'm going to add in here. But Oliver, do you have some time for Q&A?
Absolutely. I think I might try to rejoin the meeting so I can get the video working again. Let's give it a shot.
Sure.
All right, be right there. All right, it's working again. Also, by the way, my girlfriend Kelly is here, so
Hi.
she has just been listening in and will join the conversation as she wants.
Sure.
Maybe it's me.
Well, short.
Awesome. Welcome, Kelly. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me, actually.
Awesome. Well, the first question I have is related to friends. So friends are really powerful in influencing people's decisions, hence the phrase, you are the sum of your 5 closest friends. Oliver, I'm interested if you had friends growing up who were interested in this radical giving, and then also for Christians here who are interested in following a similar path. Do you think it's important for them to find Christian friends who are supportive in that?
I think it is important. I have not actually had a lot of experience finding that support or getting that support. In fact, the first 2 years I was in California, I was specifically looking for a church where there was just somebody out there who had a similar stance towards giving, because I just wanted, like, I was judging other people a lot, and I really wanted to try to navigate, like, how to grow as myself and the gifts and the passions that I had. But it was really difficult in a typical church where no one really shared the same thoughts and feelings. But that being said, over the years, I have found kinship with people who are not necessarily like exactly on the same page with giving, but I realized that it was more about authenticity and integrity for me, and that there were a lot of people who had a similar passion for that, and that taking its effect on your life and how you approach justice. For example, I have some friends in incarnational ministry, which means that they live among the urban poor in order to serve them, to minister to them. And they're not thinking directly about money as much, but it is definitely something that I think they sacrifice more than me in many ways in order to live and serve as they do. So although it's not quite as direct in terms of a parallel path, I enjoy connecting with those people.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I have a couple questions about the van. There are a lot of van questions coming in. So why don't we just fire these off?
Absolutely.
First, did you travel a lot when you were living in the van?
No, I only went van camping once, and it's because my sister wanted to. I definitely did not live up to the potential of van life. I think I did it before it really took off online. So I just didn't have those concepts in mind of what it meant to be living out of a van. For me, it was just like, what can I do to minimize my spending? Well, who needs to pay rent, you know?
It wasn't like, oh, my whole life I wanted to live in a van, so this is my time for it. It was more like, oh, I want to minimize my expenditures. I need to live in a van to do that.
I'll try it out, but yes, exactly.
Yeah. Would you ever consider living in a van again? And maybe we have to ask your partner what you think about that. But yeah, how do you think about that in the future?
I would certainly be open to it if I could find a partner who wanted to do it. But also, it would require other circumstances to line up. It's not going to make sense in New York City, right? So I think this kind of alludes to what I was saying before about what I need being harder to figure out than it might. I mean, it sounds hard. It's hard to figure out. And part of that is like where I live matters quite a lot. I was finding that living in the Bay Area in California, I grew up in the East Coast, and the cultural mismatch was really getting to me after a while. I felt very isolated, and I think it's more important for me to like grow and flourish as a person and connect with people than it is to save a few $1,000s every year.
So the cultural mismatch, not even related to the van, but just living on the West Coast as an East Coast person.
Exactly. A lot of people move to the West Coast and love it. So not to say that California is bad, but just somehow it wasn't working for me.
So there's some questions about the monthly costs of the van. Do you still have any figures on that? I know you had like a pie chart that you shared in another presentation. Feel free to share that.
Yeah.
If you don't have that, that's fine too. But
Yeah, I can share that actually. I have it open. Didn't quite get to it, but it's actually an indirect answer to the question. This is just what a monthly budget looks like for me. This is right after I moved out of the van in California. So, excuse me, it's actually not answering the question. But this is an example month. I just looked at this in retrospect because people were curious about how much how I live my life day to day. Most of the pie chart of my monthly expenses were donations. After that, it's like $1,000 for rent. Split the rest between like groceries and dating and savings, gas. So to answer more directly though, the cost of living of the van was primarily gas and insurance and like the amortized cost of buying the van. In the end, I'd estimate it's like maybe $400 a month overall, mostly the cost of the van itself.
got it.
Yeah.
Got it. And what did you do about getting enough sleep during hot nights? Also not being able to cook. I know you'd go out and eat at Google or go out to eat yourself, but you didn't have electricity in the van. Maybe there's also this factor of safety, right? So these things we take for granted when we live in an apartment. How did you navigate around that when you lived in the van?
So hot nights were not a problem because it's the Bay Area, and the nighttime temperature would very, very rarely rise above even 70. So it's close enough to the desert. So that was really convenient. In terms of safety, this is something that my mom brought up a lot, but Sunnyvale is just one of the safest cities in the US and probably the world, so I just wasn't concerned. That said, like car break-ins are a thing, especially I think they were getting more common in the Bay Area. I wasn't concerned about that either because I figured that it's a very small overlap between people who are like doing crime by breaking into cars and people who are ready to confront and harm people in order to take things. So in terms of electricity, like I said, I really treated the van as like my bed, not even my bedroom. Just I would go to the van literally to sleep. It's because the Google offices were permissive enough. I could be there any other day. Had 3 meals a day, 4 or 5 days a week, and then I had lunch on the weekends. So on the whole, there just wasn't any need for electricity. There wasn't any need for meal planning much. There's like dinner on the weekends, but I can usually scrape by saving food or just being somewhere else, like someone's house, and having dinner with them at their home, things like that. Yeah.
Got it. I want to move on to a series of questions that have to do with the demandingness of this and also just like the morality and ethics of this. So one that's pretty highly voted is this question of whether you ever felt any moral superiority or high ground due to giving radically, and how it was that you stayed humble throughout this experience.
Yes. Like I mentioned before, I was definitely struggling with judgment. I think what helped me to work through that was to understand how people work and where they're at, and like kind of why I am who I am, why I became who I am, and how it's not just like choice. I can't just say like you're doing it wrong. Come on, do better. It just doesn't work that way at all. For a while, because for a while I really felt that way. I felt like I was just I felt like there was a lot of hypocrisy. In the end, I came to understand it sort of by learning to have sympathy with the hypothetical case of a rich man and a yacht. So suppose a rich man becomes convicted about living simply in order to live more generously. But suppose also that this rich man has a thriving social life, which is very important to him, and that centers around a yacht that he owns. on the one hand, if he's really sincerely trying to live more simply, then of course the yacht is one of the things that is it's easy for it to go. You definitely no one in the world can say that you need a yacht. On the other hand, in this case, in this hypothetical case, it's like the center of his social life, maybe even the center of his life, and just removing something that's like such a central element of your life isn't going to be easy, right? It's easy to have. I find that case sympathetic, where someone might want to give very much, might want to rearrange their life, but have difficulty getting started, have difficulty knowing that path is to go from where they are to a different version of their life. I think it was a little convenient for me because I had these convictions right out of college, and I'm naturally, just by personality, pretty minimalistic. So I could sort of, I'm also like by nature driven to experiment and to try extreme things to see what happens. So these things just came together for me to be living out of the van. But I came to understand that it was very much things coming together for me, and that for other people, it's much more like the yacht, the rich man in the yacht. It's like the rich man in a fancy car and a nicer house and things like that.
Yeah, that's a very helpful analogy. Of course, if you came across any rich person with a yacht, your first thought would be, oh yeah, they don't need this yacht. They should just sell it and give it to the poor. But the way you put it is a much more humanizing view. Yes, you must be thankful you didn't grow up with a yacht, strangely enough. But so have you, you said that you didn't have many friends who thought this way, at least specifically about giving. Have you talked with your pastors at church about this? I mean, you said you did, and that they thought this was a kind of phase. Was there a common response that they gave more than, oh, this isn't sustainable? Did you ever press them on points of like, well, I see this in scripture, and this is maybe something more people should do? How did that go for you speaking to pastors about this?
It went very poorly, not in the sense that like there are arguments and fallouts or anything, but just not much more beyond what I said. Like for me, they thought it was a phase. When it comes to addressing what I was bringing up, it was always the line that people weren't necessarily mature in that way, and that it's hard to grow in maturity in that way. Which in retrospect, I definitely have more sympathy for. Like, as a pastor, it's hard to move your church in a direction that they have zero appetite for. And most churches don't have an appetite for this kind of thing. Of course, I still think that there is more that can be done in terms of growing the appetite, in terms of helping people along in that path. Yeah, I will say that there was one Christian leader, when he wasn't a pastor at the time, whose response I found very helpful. I was near the end of trying to decide, like trying to figure out what my stance for money would be. I went to Urbana, I think 2012, and just like talked to random people, staffing booths. And one of them entertained me for a few nights. And eventually, when I was asking these questions, like why is it that things are it's so normalized to just live like a middle class American? How come people aren't interested in moving that norm elsewhere? In the end, he just said he didn't know. He didn't know why things are the way they are, and didn't know how they could change. And I found that really helpful because I think it just felt freeing, and I appreciated his humility and honesty.
Yes, thanks for that. So I'd like to ask just a little bit about your career in the giving itself. So first,
yeah.
How did you weigh up earning to give with other options you considered? And actually, did you intentionally think, oh, I'm going to go work at Google, pursue tech so that I can earn more money and give it away? I kind of assumed that was the case. But one, I guess, was that the case? Was that intentional for you to go that route? And then two, did you actually sit down and think, okay, I'm going to do this and not that. I'm going to earn to give and not direct work.
Yeah, that's not what happened. I hit my senior year of university and realized that I totally missed the boat when it comes to planning my career. I had nothing lined up for me after graduation, no experience, no interest in any particular career. So I just decided to stay another year. I was like, which of the things that I learned in college do I find the most interesting? The answer was computer science. So I tacked on a major of computer science on my math major. And that's how my career happened. When it comes to these kinds of decisions, I think my stance on it is that I don't think I could do that many things for my career. I think understanding my own needs better over time, I've come to see that I like what makes the engine of my life move forward when it comes to work is hard to figure out. It's very finicky. It's sort of like saying that it's important that you're passionate about your job, but I wouldn't say that I mean passionate about my job. I would say it's more like it's important that your job is something that you can just find interesting enough to keep on doing. I don't think I can find that many things interesting enough to keep doing. And that's why I haven't really weighed very seriously when it comes to other kinds of work. Yeah, it's definitely something that I'd be open to thinking more about, but that's as far as I thought about it. Also, when I first started with my career, no, I did have everything to give in mind, but I had no idea about the disparity in terms of pay between software engineering and other kinds of engineering. So I just kind of walked into that one.
And just by chance, did you ever come across 80,000 hours as work when you were forming your career, when you were applying for jobs, choosing paths?
I forget. If I did, I definitely had pretty much the same line of thought that I just talked about. Like maybe I saw their option as like, I don't want to be a politician. I don't think that works for me. And like, similar in line for other things. I couldn't do a PhD if I tried, I'm sure. I tried to do an honors thesis and that just didn't work either. So not on the cards for me as a person, I think. A lot of those paths.
So at Google, what did they think about your choice? Did it ever lead to interesting conversations about faith, about philanthropy? And if so, did you tell them the same thing you're telling us now about your reasons and how it came about?
Yeah, it's definitely been living out of the minivan in particular has been one that I've come to appreciate. I think the most, maybe even the greatest impact from it is not the money. It's from being able to talk about these things and have an interesting segue into it. Because otherwise, like just talking about giving and stuff, it's not a compelling start for a conversation for most people. Yeah, especially with my old team. When I first started at Google, that team I stayed on for 6 years, great team, had a lot of opportunities to give little presentations and extracurricular things, lightning talks. And I tended to choose like charitable giving and the minivan at the end as my topics of choice. So didn't lead to that many deeper conversations about it, but I think definitely got a lot of people's juices going, got their attention and their eyes and ears for a few minutes at a time at least.
I imagine there's also a faith element here where it's a great opportunity to share about Jesus with other people, right? If you're showing like this radical choice that you're making because the way you read scripture, I imagine your testimony touched many people through that.
Yeah, I would mention my faith, but not very. I wouldn't go into too much detail because I didn't want the presentation to be about that. Just mention that typically it's I make these choices in large part because of my faith, but also there's these other elements that might be interesting to you. That's a lot of how my presentations tend to go.
Yeah, thanks for that. So where did you give to, and why? I don't think you touched on that yet.
I have not. I primarily give to GiveWell. I give as well to about 20% of it to ministers that I know personally, whose work I trust. There are a few reasons for this. The main reason is that.
Could you just share what GiveWell is for those who haven't heard about it?
Oh, yeah, GiveWell is a charity evaluator that tries to find the most cost-effective, provably cost-effective interventions to be able to give to. So that provably cost-effective means both impact per dollar and like having actual research behind that. that the figures that they work with. GiveWell is definitely not the end-all and be-all of charity, but I think on the whole, the market, like charity is essentially a marketplace. There are people who are buying for funding, and people providing that funding. But on the whole, it's not an organized marketplace. It's not, people are not actually funding the lowest hanging fruit first. There's like some attention given to that for sure, but it's not as rigorous as it could or should be. People are usually driven by essentially what's marketing material or promises, rather than by more rigorous evaluation. So that's one reason. I think the whole thing probably leads to a lot of low-hanging fruit relative to other opportunities. Another reason is that I just find that this form of neglect, this form of love and neglect, is the most compelling for me. Like as Christians, of course, what crossed our mind is also giving. Like I do give to ministries, of course, but like why not, for example, give to evangelism entirely? Like maybe the benefit of saving one soul is worth a bunch of people just living a little bit longer, right? That's an argument that people have made to me. I don't find it compelling because it doesn't strike me as loving. Exactly what you define as loving, I'm trying to find love for us. I think every person has to contemplate that for themselves. I think there's something overly mechanical about deciding, like working backwards from this math, like literal math, about the value of eternity versus loving the people around you. And as I say that, it strikes me a little funny because, of course, effective altruism is all about doing math. Math is not a problem. Using math to decide what love is the problem. I think that's the problem for me. I think love is just like being loving and following Jesus' footsteps. It doesn't look like love, therefore calculate and only act in a calculated fashion. It seems a little bit different from that. I think there's a lot of space for what can't be verbalized. In other words, it can't be calculated. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot we could talk about there.
Yeah.
We have about I don't know how much time you have. We have about another 10 minutes or so. Does that sound good, or should we wrap it up even sooner?
No. I have time.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's just very interesting that calculating eternity into a moral decision would seem overly calculating, or overly mechanical, I think you put it. But calculating how to save the most lives at the lowest cost doesn't for you. Is that about right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's true.
Now, I have just some questions about a couple more questions about church, family. It's a question for Kelly too. So somebody who frequents the New York City area asks what Christian communities you're a part of. Do you attend a church in New York? This is an ecumenical group. I don't mind you sharing, of course, what your faith tradition is, if you like, though of course no pressure. How much alignment does your church in New York City have with your thoughts on giving?
I attend a church called Joy Manhattan. It's a relatively small church. It's like maybe 100 people. It's an interesting place when it comes to alignment with me. It's not very well aligned, but I think that's actually an opportunity because the pastor is about a year new, and he is more aligned. He is more interested in making justice closer to the heart of what the church does. So that's actually, I'd say it's an even split of why I'm there. On the one half, I find the culture works for me, and that's something that matters a lot to me, as I've been talking about. I feel like I can belong there. But on the other half, I feel like there's a real opportunity for me to be there, to helping to transform the church a little bit. Whereas, like, if I were to just go to a church where a lot of people agree with me, I wouldn't really feel like I had that much to change there in terms of culture. And cultural change is one of the most interesting things for me. I've also been participating in this program from Redeemer called Gotham. But yeah, in terms of alignment, it's okay. It's a Redeemer, of course, is Tim Keller's church. Church is started by Tim Keller, and he's a good preacher. Says good things. It's not really front and center for them, but it's something that they do pay attention to. So I respect them for what they are.
Great, thanks for that. And so moving on to a question for Kelly. Kelly, thanks so much for joining. What was your
Yeah, no
initial
problem.
impression when you heard about like Oliver's van life, his studying, his student habits?
What was my first impression of it?
Yes,
So,
what was your first impression?
I had, I guess it was easy for me to listen to it because at that time I told him I never want to date him. And so there was no pressure of having to like think about any of this. So I actually got to see him date other people first and how he dated them and like stuff like that. And so, so I guess it was just something that like I didn't have to worry about from the get-go, and I got to get more used to it and stuff like that. I'm still trying to figure that out, I think. I think there's conversations and stuff like that, and so I'm kind of excited. I'm also like kind of like interested in experimenting a little bit, so we'll see. Yeah.
Yes. So you at first you weren't so sure, but you saw how he treated other people in the past, and you saw that it wasn't impossible to date him, to say the least.
Yeah, it wasn't. I think that I think you can hear a lot of flexibility in the way he speaks of it, and it's not very legalistic, and I think it is very thoughtful, and I think that maybe that spirit of it actually allows for a lot of conversation, and actually I'm a little inspired in a little bit, and just curious to how, like, in terms of like narration from myself. So I don't know where I will land, right? But I think that like it doesn't feel ever pressure or anything. It's just kind of like I'm just kind of like, oh, I wonder what's like what we would discuss about or something like that. Yeah, when it comes up. Yeah.
Well, did you know him when he was living in the van, or did you know him after that?
I didn't. No, I didn't know him when he was in the van because that was in California, and we kind of met in New York. So, yeah. I don't know if you still have the van, so maybe I should go check it out.
I still own the van technically because I've been very slow about moving the registration and ownership to my parents.
I see. Maybe we should just stay in the van for a night or something.
Right. Well, I know that's something that comes up in this broader movement about giving in effective altruism, is like how important it is to find a partner who's aligned with like radical giving, because I mean that's quite a significant life sacrifice some people make. So it's really cool that you just see the grace and the thoughtfulness with which Oliver approaches it. Do either of you have any additional advice for Christians who want to give radically, who want to find a partner, who maybe don't have a partner, who want to find a partner who's supportive of this? Just any advice for them that you would have?
It would feel disingenuous to say that I had advice, but I can say that my current thoughts on this are that what matters more is finding someone who has like generally the right spirit approaching justice and life, and then has a similar sense of normalcy about lifestyle, a simple lower middle class lifestyle, and they're not like super interested in moving it. Then it's fine, Like I don't think someone who, I'll just leave it at that.
I have nothing to say.
Sorry.
Well, thanks so much for pitching in there. Yes. I'm looking through the rest of the questions. This has been great so far. Thank you so much for your openness and for all these wonderful answers. One, just going off of the most upvoted questions, I'll just field one more question if that's okay.
Absolutely.
So David asked, were there any things that were just easier to give up than you expected, or that actually improved your life by giving them up? Maybe that's a nice note to close on. Do you think that, I guess telling from your own story, are there things that seem like sacrifices at first, but that actually brought to a more full, rich life?
There isn't a specific thing that comes to mind, but there is a general pattern that I've noticed that comes to mind, which is that I'll talk about the opposite of the pattern first. It's very hard to give gifts to my sister because my sister, she's not like particularly wealthy, but she has great taste and a great sense of what she needs. So whenever she needs something, she just buys a good object to fill that need. And I found that by living as I do and just like trying to see what happens if I can live without stuff, I end up with these vacuums in my life where it's clear that there is space for something that could be like a cherished part of my daily routine. And in fact, my sister is a good example of someone who is able to fill that space by buying me a thing or two for a gift. So she bought me a nice towel, and it's just like slightly fancier than your average towel, but it has been a great gift, and I've used it for years. I really love having that particular gift. So I guess my overall answer is more that there's this pattern where if I leave these needs a little unfulfilled, it creates more space for interacting with people in those needs, either meeting them together or receiving gifts or giving gifts in that sense.
Wonderful, thank you. So to close, is there any way that we can be Christians and the EA community can be praying for you, can be praying for Kelly? Is there anything that stands out, ways that we can be praying for you?
I think you can pray that I continue to explore well how to grow as a person. I'm still like trying to move away from this overly stringent approach to life and trying to make more space for exploration, which I think otherwise end up being a little bit too soldier-like in mentality and not enough opportunity to be exploring what I don't know or haven't grown into yet.
Thank you. And great. And anything for you, Kelly, as well? Any way we can be praying for you?
Oh, I'm not sure yet. So I think I'll just leave it at that. Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks so much for joining. And hey, if we want to stay in contact with you, Oliver, is there an email or some follow-up way we can do that?
Yeah, you can share my email. I think I have shared it with you. Yes.
I can share it in the chat for those on the call. Great.
Yeah,
We'll do that.
Facebook is fine as well.
So, well, hey, thanks so much for joining. If we can just clap again for Oliver and Kelly, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, guys. Take care.